Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new It's a Progressive World interview. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Professor Daniel Bessner. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'm just going to give a short introduction, very quick, and then we'll get right into it. So, Daniel is currently an associate professor of international studies at the University of Washington. He's an intellectual historian of U.S. foreign relations and the author of Democracy in Exile, Hans Speer and the Rise of the Defense Intellectual. You can find a link to his books and works on his website in the description box below. Daniel is also the author of a relatively new article in the New Republic titled Does American Fascism Exist?, which will be the main focus of today, and I would say has proven to be a little bit controversial, perhaps criticized from both sides, maybe you can say from the left and the right. So Daniel, thanks again. Anything you would like to add there or?
No, that sounds great. I guess I co-host a podcast too called American Prestige. We talk about U.S. foreign affairs and international relations. So if people are interested in those subjects, they might want to check that out too.
Definitely. And
I listened
Sam,
to that. It's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
yeah, and Sam was just telling me you're also on the Bill Maher show about a week ago. How did that go?
Yeah, I was on. Well, that's for you to decide, not me.
I haven't
But yeah,
seen it. Sam just told me.
I was on the Bill Maher show about a week ago.
Yeah, I've only seen clips too. I haven't been managed to download it yet. So.
Oh, okay, yeah. The clips, I think I talk in a couple of them, but I don't talk in the most controversial one. In the clip, I did talk about the subject of crime in Chicago afterwards, but they didn't include that part. So
I see.
I thought it's live. Bill Maher isn't live. For years I thought it was.
yeah.
Okay, Daniel. So before getting into the article, I just wanted to ask you any kind of recent developments in U.S. politics or global politics that have in particular caught your attention. I don't know, maybe Tucker Carlson leaving Fox or anything else.
Oh, I guess that would be the biggest one. But I don't have much to say that people haven't said before. It's probably linked to numerous things. This is the problem with having a capitalist media, typical left-wing responses to it. But otherwise, there hasn't been much that's been going on here, or at least there hasn't been much that's caught my attention.
Okay, all right. So do you mind giving everybody a little short overview of what's your main argument in your article, Does American Fascism Exist?
Sure. So the article, I think, is best understood as being a critique of people who identify fascism in the American context in a variety of ways. First, from an analytical perspective, I don't think the structural conditions of the United States in the 2010s and 2020s are meaningfully similar to the structural conditions that gave rise to fascism in Italy and especially Nazi Germany. There's not an experience of total war. There's not the presence of a powerful left that would encourage capital to ally with the extreme right wing. There's not street gangs going around beating up and murdering people. There's not a broad agreement amongst large swaths of the population that liberal democracy is inherently illegitimate. And so I don't think that whatever we have here could meaningfully be described as fascist, especially here being, of course, the United States, especially given the fact that there's a long history of American racism, American gang violence, and that I don't mean like in the 20th century sense, but like literal armed men coming together to hurt people. There's American histories of genocide against indigenous peoples. Americans have a long history of violently incarcerating minorities. So there's a long history in the United States that you could draw on to explain what's going on today that you don't need to draw on other histories, particularly the history of fascism, which provides, I think, a type of othering function to a certain degree by making Americans not look to their own history, but look to the history of another country or other countries to explain what's going on. Then there's the popular argument. I don't think the identification of fascism is particularly mobilizing. It does seem like the notion that the United States, that American citizens needed to defend democracy did help mobilize in the recent elections. But I think we could get that argument without really mentioning fascism. So that's sort of the basic perspective. And then in the piece itself, I go through how Americans have actually deployed fascism, and there's various phases of it. In the 1930s, fascism really was just used as a political insult. It was pejorative. People across the political spectrum refer to other people as fascists. It essentially signified that you really didn't like them. After World War II, until roughly the mid to late 1960s, fascism had a relatively coherent meaning in that it referred to the far right of the political spectrum, a political spectrum, I might add, that was adopted in the United States really only in the 1940s. The European political spectrum of left to right wasn't really used in the US. Americans thought that they had a different political constellation that didn't really line up with left and right. But it was only in the 40s, particularly once liberals or Cold War liberals really became the dominant part of the American state, they started to adopt this political spectrum and refer to communism on the extreme left and fascism on the extreme right. And so roughly from the mid 40s to the mid to late 60s, fascism referred to the extreme right. And then from roughly the late 60s until I'd say 2016, fascism returned to its 1930s usage, where it referred to basically someone that someone really didn't like. And it was effectively a curse word. And then since Trump, it's kind of returned to its mid 40s to mid 60s meaning, where it effectively refers to the extreme right. So those are the various arguments that I lay out in the piece.
Yeah, that historical overview was very interesting. And I mean, the first time I heard your argument, the first thing that caught my attention is just the word fascism. More than any other word, just seems to be thrown around at the most meaningless thing. Like, someone doesn't like a person who's not even into politics or anything like that, and you just call them fascism. But going back to your other arguments, and in the beginning, described a lot of horrendous things that have happened in the U.S. and have been going on in the U.S. So couldn't someone say, well, yeah, that's what fascism refers to? Or if not, if you're not going to call that fascism, then what are you going to call that? I mean, I shared with you, we had Gerald Horn on, and I actually didn't know that he was aware of your article and all this, and it was going to be he was going to criticize it. But when we were kind of pushing back a little bit, he kind of said, well, I would ask Daniel, so what would you say? So the onus is with you. Fine, you don't like fascism, so what word would you use to describe some injustices in the US?
Right-wing extremism. I had never understood that argument. That's right there, right-wing extremism. That's funny. I'll listen to the episode. I didn't know Horn was aware of the article. I mean, particularly someone of his generation is going to be very attached to it. I don't begrudge people that if they grew up using a term or they came of political age using a term, like feel free to use it. I just don't think it's analytically persuasive or popularly meaningful. I'm not the fascist police. They could use whatever term they like, but feel free to disagree with my argument. I think the fact that people get so emotional about it, not saying that Horn did, I never listened to the interview, but there's been a lot of emotional responses, suggests that it's also wrapped up in people's individual identities, where they think that, I'm a good person, I'm identifying fascist, which is fine, but whatever, not especially interesting. That's a typical thing. Oh, I should have been on with Horn. We could have had an argument.
Oh, well. Just to play the devil's advocate, though, do you think for that generation it can be very mobilizing for the suburban, like older generation in America?
Well,
if
as
you
you
say
know,
somebody's fascist.
as you know, Americans have done a great job of ending racism ever since we used the fascism term. No, it's very obviously been politically useless. I just don't think how you could make any other claim. It's been politically useless. Maybe affectively important, but America is pretty horrible in a lot of ways, in terms of mass incarceration, in terms of racism, in terms of horrible class inequality. And the left has been using fascism as an insult for 50 years, over 50 years. It doesn't seem to have made much of an effect. I mean, that's just the empirics of it all. So yeah, I think if they didn't use fascism, I don't think things would have necessarily been that different either. They could have used right-wing extremism. I don't think things would have necessarily changed. But clearly, it's not like getting rid of fascism is not going to be that big of a deal, I think.
But there's another thing that you said in your answer, though, in your first part of your answer. I just want to ask you again. You said, you don't need to import a term or a concept from another country, another situation. But I mean, can't you really say that about, anything? Because for any kind of political term, ideology, we kind of have a first example that caught our
There's a
attention.
particular history in the United States about fascism and Nazism, and the sort of founding myth of modern American liberalism and the modern American state is that it defeated fascism/Nazism. So yes, to some sense, you're right. In a basic factual sense, terms come from abroad, but it's also the valence of what it means. And the valence is you're thinking of Nazi Germany. You're not thinking of Reconstruction. You're not thinking of the Klan. You're not thinking of indigenous genocide. You're not thinking of slave owners when you use the term fascism. You're thinking of brown-shirted or black-shirted thugs in Nazi Germany. That's just the fact.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
Do you think analytically, not just in a political sense, just for academic sake, is it useful to have one term for fascism, single party state, and one for the ethno-nationalism of the more like Hitler, like one for basically what Mussolini was and one more for the Nazi thing? Do you think it's analytically useful?
Right, especially because Nazis, they much more refer to themselves as National Socialists, and it was the Italians who really were fascists. From an analytical perspective, probably not. I mean, I haven't done the reading in Nazi Germany history, looking specifically for this term. I've done a ton of reading in the history of Nazi Germany, but my sense is that they usually use National Socialism, the historiography. Maybe sometimes they use fascist, but my sense is in the actual professional historiography on Nazi Germany, much more it's referring to Nazism and National Socialism. But I haven't read that literature looking specifically for the use of the term. So that's a bit of a sense.
Historically, we have a lot of parties that are single party authoritarian states controlled, corporatist, but like the Portuguese guy or the Spanish guy, Franco, but they're not necessarily racist. I mean, they are racist, but they're not like, putting people in camp racist, that like it.
Right. I mean, well, I think there's a meaningful connection between the prison industrial complex and things like concentration camps. But again, concentration camps were not a fascist invention. The British use them, other people use them, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, what you're referencing is the fact that in our minds, it is a fascist invention. Yeah. So that's why actually using the term distracts from the historical reality.
I mean, but I would like, would you say in like South Africa or like West Africa, they use the concentration camp in the same racially motivated way that was done in Germany?
I'm sorry, in South Africa, did they use the concentration camps in the same racially motivated way?
Because I believe they put Dutch people there, right? In the Boer War.
Yes, I am not an expert on the subject, but yeah, my sense is there was racial motivation. There was racial motivation, but of course, race functions differently in different moments. Like we might not think of British and Dutch hatred as today in 2023 they're all white, but these were shifting categories over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries as well. And that requires you to do some real digging into the racialized imaginary of British colonialism in South Africa, before I could declaim on a subject like this. Like Whoopi Goldberg said, I don't know if you guys remember, the Holocaust was about white people, on white people. And from the context of 2022 America, that might have made sense. But obviously the Jews were not racialized as quote unquote white, and whiteness meant something different in Europe. So again, you have to look into it.
No, that Whoopi Goldberg statement, I'll never forget that. It's kind of my second favorite because she has this other clip where she says Jill Biden is a doctor, but then she goes on to say, she's a terrific doctor. And, how could you know that without ever having experience or had that doctor or someone recommended? So you can just tell, I don't know, some kind of lying problem or something that that she has, but yeah, she's
Right,
special
right.
there.
Well, what she was doing, I think, was basically using an American lens uh, to understand a non-American context, which is a big problem, obviously.
Yeah, and she really didn't seem to quite, because she came back to it like a few months later or something. I think she kind of tried again pushing back. So she was really clearly not understanding. But so what caught your attention with the term? Like, why did you decide to, write about fascism? Or maybe you've worked on it more. Like, what kind of caught your attention? And you're like, okay, let me write a piece on this and do some research.
Exile. Damn it,
Oh, sorry, Dan, you got cut off there.
be good. We should be good. I
Okay, we're
should be
back.
back. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All good.
So, and if it's not good, I'll move to the other room. There's sometimes internet issues here.
No, it's all good.
Basically, I had studied Nazism, the history of Nazism, and the history of the exile from Nazi Germany to the United States. And in my own work, I noticed how oftentimes references to Nazism and fascism were used to justify and legitimate liberal projects. And it just became clear to me that this was the most powerful way that the term fascism actually affected history. It wasn't the left-wing critique of trying to make people realize that elements of the American system meaningfully mirrored elements of Nazi Germany, but it was effectively liberals in power who referred to a fascist boogeyman in order to retrench their own power for what I would say are liberal purposes. So that was probably the origins of it. And then I noticed that a lot of people were using it in reference to Donald Trump. And again, as I described, for both analytical and political reasons, I didn't think that was especially useful or illuminating.
Yeah, certainly. So Sam, I see here you had a kind of interesting question, which seems like about American exceptionalism, but I'm not too sure what you're referring
Yeah.
to. So maybe I'll let you ask that one.
So you were on the This Is Revolution podcast, and you had a great conversation about reverse American exceptionalism. So I thought I'll ask you about that. What is reverse American exceptionalism in your view? And then I kind of wanted to play the devil's advocate, if it's okay.
No, I love devil's advocates. That's what I got into this business for. So negative American exceptionalism is just, instead of thinking that America is the font of freedom and liberty bringing it to the world, it's just America is the source of all evil, and that it's uniquely terrible, and it kind of flattens the actual history of the United States by saying that. At the same time, I do think, especially since 1945, that the United States, being a global empire, being a global hegemon, is more responsible for a lot of bad things that have happened in the world. So one should be able to hold those two thoughts in their head at the same time, that you should be able to criticize the United States and recognize its causal power in the world without attributing some sort of metaphysical negative core to it, even if the nation has, I would say, repeatedly done terrible, terrible things.
But then again, all nations have all countries, but
some are more powerful than others.
Yeah,
that's the truth.
And I agree with you like 99% of times, but can we say we should also, like, when we discuss Saudi Arabia or Iran, we take into account, for example, Saudis were Wahhabis or Iranians were Shia fanatics or something. We take these sort of things into account, like as a historical thing. So like in like some works, historically speaking, shouldn't we take the settler white colonialism sort of into account as a sort of a important ideological force?
Of course, yeah, it's foundational. Absolutely, I don't see where we disagree. Yeah, it's foundational to U.S. history. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I think
settler colonialism, racism, and genocide are foundational to the entire American project. There is no American project without that.
No. I think some people think when you say that America is not the fountain of all evil, you're denying that or something, which I don't think you are.
I can't account for how people willingly misinterpret words. I have plenty of statements and writings about all of this. People want to identify themselves on Twitter as something good for them, but of course, like obviously, like America committed settler colonial genocide from the before the Republic was founded, continued to expand to the westward, expanded overseas, did many horrible things throughout the 20th century, tried to overthrow foreign regimes many times, did so in some cases, committed horrible wars, committed horrible human rights abuses. Yeah, it's the metaphysical element that is the problem, just like it's the metaphysical element with the positive American exceptionalism.
I think if Gerald Horne heard you say settler colonialism, he'll be very, very happy and forget about all
so
the
yeah,
rest.
so basically, did Horne accuse me of this? He's just not familiar with my work.
No. I don't want to be
exactly,
putting words.
no.
No. Sorry, I don't want to be.
No,
Exactly.
for sure. I mean, it's like that's such an yeah, for that generation. Also, I think like he's in his 70s, I believe, right? Gerald Horne.
I
Let
think
me
so,
look this
yeah.
up. Like he's fighting a battle that like his side won. You know, if he said that about me, yeah, he's 74 according to Wikipedia.
No, he
So,
did.
like,
I mean, we are kind of I mean, we don't
Yeah.
know. I don't remember exactly what he said. Yeah, I mean,
he's a
we'll
great
send you the video.
historian.
We send you the
I
clip.
shouldn't refer to him. He's a great historian, and I don't know
I
what
don't
he
want to,
said.
yeah.
No, I
But
only
people of
said
that
that.
generation, when he was arguing this, or when people of
Mm.
that generation were arguing this, they were arguing against people who disagree with that. To me, this has just become common sense of the historical
Yeah.
profession. Basically.
No, I only said this because it's just the foundational part of his narrative about talking about settler colonialism when he talks about the U.S. But Daniel, I had one last question on my side. I don't know if Sam has other questions. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just before I do, just the general thing, I find that almost all political terms, when they go into mainstream, they become floating signifiers, as you point out in your article, like fascism, like democracy, fascism, imperialism. So how can we even, like, it seems like it's unstoppable, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Well, fascism is just pure affective term. Like, it's not like it's a living, breathing ideological movement in the United States, like in a way connected to Nazi Germany or Italy. There's far right white supremacist movements, but again, those have much deeper histories in the American context. I think fascism primarily functions as a curse word and has for decades at this point.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely agree with that. So now I was just thinking, recently it seems like China has really woken up. I mean, they kind of put together, maybe to an extent, the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal recently, and they're kind of very active in foreign policy right now. So has that made you think a little bit about maybe the US's role in foreign policy in very recent years, like last few years and all this, especially towards Middle East or China? Has any of that got you thinking about anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the U.S., as it has been doing for a while, is going to try to quietly disengage from the Middle East. I mean, still be involved, but not be involved as it was, and try to shift its attentions to East Asia in what I think is going to be a quixotic project to maintain regional hegemony in East Asia. I wrote a piece in Harper's about this at length. I just don't think that's possible. I don't think it's good. I mean, I guess I should say that. I don't think the U.S. should be a hegemonic in any region, let alone regions that are very far from it. But in this case, I just think it's just you're not gonna be able to prevent some form of Chinese hegemony, or whether there's a Chinese-Indian struggle over hegemony, or Chinese-Japanese, India, Korea, whatever it may be. The U.S. is not going to be able to maintain regional hegemony in East Asia, and I fear that not recognizing what is an obvious fact is going to lead to a lot of death, destruction, and deracination, much more than it needed to be otherwise.
Yes, certainly. The whole pivot to China, if you ask me, sounds like quite a challenging pivot. I would have picked something easier, but yeah. So,
yeah, it's not going to work, in my opinion, in the medium
Pivot to
term.
Australia.
Yeah, maybe.
Pivot to New Zealand.
Yeah, or maybe even South America or something might be a bit easier. But yeah.
Do you think there is any?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, if you have any other
chance that
questions.
China is gonna play any role in the Ukraine conflict? Like a lot of European news channels are hoping right now.
There's probably a good shot, or at least that they'll try. It'll be useful for them, I think, if they do, if they're able to be viewed as people who came in and helped solve a difficult problem. I don't think they'll really be able to do much, but there's a good chance. I think there's a good chance.
No, don't you think America would? I thought America would be very much against that, much more than the Iran-Saudi thing. I feel like Europe is like the backyard of something like America, I feel.
Yeah, I don't think America will be happy, but I don't think there'll be much they'll be able to do about it either.
Oh, fair enough.
Sam, did you have any other questions or anything else you wanted to ask Daniel?
No, just I had one thesis I kind of wanted to confirm. So it's basically not right. I shouldn't, whenever in an argument I lose my temper, I shouldn't call my dad a fascist. That's what you're saying in your article.
Feel free to call your dad a fascist. That's between you and your dad. Again, I'm not the fascist, please.
Sure, but it's not helpful to the conversation, I don't think.
I don't think it. Yeah, I don't. It probably doesn't help much. Would be my guess.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, and we'll link to your article and your podcast channel and everything down in the description box below. And if anybody has any comments, questions, criticisms, please leave them and we'll try to answer them on Daniel's behalf. So thank you for watching and thank you for joining us, Daniel. And please like and subscribe.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.